which Foucault subsequently laid out in the archaeology of knowledge. In other words, the path of a thought of language. I did so, however, with the sense that I was also traversing the other path that he claimed diverged from this first, a path toward the question of the human. I just pause for a second. If you're familiar with les mots et les choses, or the order of things, I think it's translated. In the last chapters, Foucault says the future of philosophy will rest upon a choice. Either we follow the path of language, or we go along the path, let's just say, toward the question of the human. And he asserts that this path, there's a divergence here. There's a kind of crossroads. We go one way or the other. Now, in the archaeology of knowledge, he took the path of language. And then in a later text, he seems to be taking something closer to the path toward the human, with a question of the care of the self. But in each case, there's a kind of divergence here. My view was that if we take the path of language, following the kind of thinking that I have pointed to here with Heidegger, in fact, these two paths come together. That's what Heidegger's later thinking on language was pointing to. So I was trying to follow that, and in that sense, trying to return to the question of the human, but in a way that exceeded the grasp, let's so to speak, of humanism. So I took the path of language to get to the question of the human. Most of Foucault's readers, it has to be said, simply took the path of cultural studies, and I parted with them altogether. I lost even, not that I wanted to, but I lost even Derrida at one point in this process, because it was not until the late 1990s that he was prepared to recognize the question of the human. But it was clear to me that a consequent thought of the being of language, as Heidegger had described it, would take us back to the question of the human in a way that it would exceed the bounds of humanism. There I met Lacan, who spoke of what he called the human that suffers the signifier, as well as Blanchot and Lyotard, all three of whom were attentive to the question of disaster, both in the socio-political sense and in the sense of a form of exposure of thought to something that exceeds its capacity. In thinking this last notion of disaster, this notion of exposure, all three, as it happens, Blanchot, Lacan, Lyotard, all three gave a prominent place to the question of infancy, which Lyotard approached in one of his volumes under the name of the inhuman. On the one hand, Lyotard argued the inhuman might name the processes at work in the contemporary socio-economic order, as well as what becomes of the human in such an order, given that these forces require a kind of excising of the unproductive or inassimilable manifestations of human finitude. On the other, so on the one hand, inhuman names this disaster on the socio-political level. On the other, disaster can name that to which the human